not unlike the rest of the planet. And yet they lived in harmony with the land and its animals, always deeply aware that their very existence depended on it. And then there were other men and women, mostly Europeans, settling at first along the narrow fringe by the Atlantic Ocean, gradually, inevitably, pushing westward as population grew. It was not easy, for it was a tough, impenetrable, untamed life, yielding its bounty only grudgingly to settlers and farmers. And above it all, there was the clash of civilizations, as Native Americans fought to retain their land and their way of life in the face of the unceasing push of the white man. A clash that was inevitable, perhaps, but often brutal and unthinking, leaving behind it a legacy of death and destruction no one can be proud of. But even as the white man's civilization slowly spread beyond the original 13 colonies, the West, the land beyond the Mississippi River, was a blank. No one really knew what was there. With the stroke of a pen, President Thomas Jefferson changed all that, authorizing the so-called Louisiana Purchase, the purchase of France's claim to most of the land beyond the Mississippi for $6 million. Almost immediately, Jefferson authorized a series of expeditions into the new region to find out what the United States had really bought. The Lewis and Clark expedition journeyed up the Missouri River into the Northwest, an incredible feat, almost without parallel in the history of exploration. Lieutenant Zebulon Montgomery Pike explored the southern section, pushing as far as Colorado and discovering the mountain which now bears his name. The mountain's towering snow-capped height was so much taller than anything he had ever seen before that he solemnly declared Pike's Peak would never be climbed by man. The reports Pike and other explorers brought back fired the young nation's imagination. At first, there was only the occasional trapper or fur trader, lured by tales of unimagined wealth. But within decades, settlers were beginning to make the first thrusts into the new land beyond the Mississippi. Yet the West was so vast, so unexplored, that men assumed it would take hundreds of years before the West was ever tamed and settled. One word, just one word, changed all that. The date, 1848. The place, Summersville, a crude frontier settlement in California. The discovery, a flash of yellow in the bottom of a pan. Gold. Within weeks, creeks and rivers around Sacramento were swarming with men intent on making their fortunes. And as soon as the news reached the East Coast, the stampede west began. Gold. By every means possible, thousands set out to make their fortunes. Never mind there were no roads, no reliable maps. A horse-covered wagon, boat around the southernmost tip of South America, even by foot they came, intent on only one thing, gold. But it did not stop with California. A decade later, the magical spell of gold fever sent new waves of adventurers westward, this time to Colorado. The discovery of gold along the Rocky Mountain foothills sparked a new gold rush. And by 1859, the cry of Pike's Peak or bust resounded across the prairies as thousands rushed westward, convinced they would soon be rich. During the next few decades, countless miners searched every stream, every valley, every mountain canyon, looking for the fabled yellow metal. Towns sprang up overnight as discovery followed discovery. Towns that were often no more than a jumble of tents at first, then taking on the shape of a real town if the discovery looked promising. It was a time like no other in America's history, a rough and tumble time, a wild and woolly age populated with adventurers and card sharks, and gamblers and gunfighters, stagecoach robbers, and you name it. And the ramshackle towns they hurriedly threw up were like nothing else either. Places where fortunes changed at the turn of a shovel, sometimes the turn of a car. They called it the Wild West, and that's what it was. During the 1860s and 1870s, men searching for gold blanketed the West, covering almost every nook and cranny in their frantic search for gold. One word, gold, accomplished in a few short years what many had assumed would take centuries, the settlement of the West. Civilization inevitably followed the miners, the adventurers, and the gamblers. They needed supplies and clothes and even, sometimes, haircuts. They needed transportation. And before long, the twin steel ribbons of the railroads were opening the West to new waves of immigrants. And before long, they needed schools and churches and libraries and newspapers. Little by little, the excitement, the adventure, the raw spirit of the frontier died down. By the time gold was discovered in Cripple Creek in 1891, the frontier was almost gone. Today, almost nothing remains of those exciting days of the Old West. A scattered pile of weathered lumber, a tumbled pile of rocks marking an old mine, an occasional rusty wagon wheel or piece of equipment. The rip-roaring camps of 100 or more years ago have become ghost towns, inhabited only by the memory of a bygone era. An era marked not only by adventure and drama and discovery, but by courage, perseverance, and mission. No, the Old West is gone forever. But today, those exciting days still live here at Ghost Town in Colorado Springs. Assembled in two historic buildings and preserved undercover for all time, every old building in Ghost Town is authentically furnished just the way it would have been 100 or more years ago. Every building tells its own fascinating and authentic story of life on the western frontier. And even the large buildings housing Ghost Town have a story to tell, for once they were the repair shops for the historic Midland Railroad, which transported millions in gold ore from Cripple Creek to the old Golden Cycle Mill just up the street. The present Van Briggle Pottery Building across the way was once the Midland Railroad's roundhouse. President Theodore Roosevelt's celebrated train trip to Cripple Creek began on these grounds, right up where you parked your car. Yes, here at Ghost Town, you can relive the history of one of America's most exciting periods. Take time to see how different life was then, and take time also to reflect on the vision and courage of those men and women who tamed the American West.